If you have been stacking silver for any length of time, you have probably come across some of these. This is an American prospector silver round. These were minted by Englehard in the 1980s. They were wildly popular at the time. I think I remember just about every local coin shop having stacks of these. They were really filling that void. People who wanted to own pure silver seemed to be drawn to them. And they were one of the first privately minted rounds that I remember seeing. And the explanation that I was given is probably true. Why aren't these in bar form? Bars take a little bit more to produce. They are more costly to produce, but coins, or coin medallions, or rounds, or whatever you want to call them, significantly cheaper to produce. So the prospectors took off like wildfire and everybody was buying them. They started making these in 1982. That date rings a bell. That was the same year that Mexico launched the Libertad. So they were in direct competition with the Libertad when there were really no other players in this troy ounce denominated 999 pure silver vehicle out there. But that changed in November of 1986, and that's when the United States of America launched the Silver Eagle. So if you were competing against a Silver Eagle and all of a sudden you had the entire weight of the United States government behind you producing something that was kind of comparable, except that it was denominated with an actual non-circulating legal tender status value of $1 and all of the protections and everything else that comes along with it, it's very possible to see that the writing was on the wall for the prospectors, and they ended that run shortly after the Eagle was released. I'm not sure that that was what caused their extinction, but it certainly seems to be kind of that woolly mammoth versus the early Australopithecine caveman type hunting them. It seems like the Silver Eagle probably spelled the doom for those prospectors. Incidentally, Johnson Matthey also released a silver round that was somewhat similar, and this is an original set of these Bill of Rights or First Rights of the American series, of course in the original packaging. The Prospector, a very popular silver round, but the Prospector wasn't first, not by a long shot, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about a series of silver rounds that predated the Prospector by as much as a decade. This is the 50-year club of silver rounds. These rounds all made 1974 or before, and that's the subject of this video. If you are new to the channel, my name is White. You can call me White Cross. You can call me Dub C. I answer to just about anything, and I am really glad that you're here with me today to explore some of these very early 999 silver rounds. I thought it would be kind of fun to take a deeper dive into some of the pieces that you see here before you, because 2024 marks the 50th anniversary of the release of a lot of these pieces. If you are new to the channel, I like to begin each of the videos with a simple disclaimer, and that is that I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 40 or 50 years. And I also like to begin each of my videos with a couple of concepts that we can work back into the subject matter. The subject matter, the concept that I wanted to talk about here, is the idea of millesimal. Millesimal. That's a weird sounding word, and believe me, I had to listen to it spoken several times before it started to make any sense to me, because this is a word that I've seen for decades, but I'd never heard it pronounced out loud before. Isn't it funny how that happens sometimes? And I was probably mispronouncing it had I ever used it. I'm sure I did at some point in the past. Millesimal, I'll put the definition up here. It's the quotient of a unit divided by 1,000. So a larger definition, a system of denoting the purity of precious metals by parts per thousands of pure metal in mass of the alloy. So for example, if you have 999 silver, the reason why we call it 999 is that's a millesimal evaluation. That 999 is 0.999 pure, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. That's that third decimal place. But we don't call it a decimal. It's kind of odd. And when you're talking about pure silver or sterling silver, we call it 92.5%. Or 999 silver, we call it 99.9%. But the word you would use when you're talking about that decimal, you don't call it a decimal figure, you actually call it millesimal. So millesimal is when you see 0.999, That's what that's referring to. That is a millesimal figure. Millesimal, that's just the simple word that we're going to use. We will see that come up a few more times in this video. That's why I wanted to arm you with that knowledge. Each of these rounds that we're taking a look at here today are at least 50 years old. Is there some kind of a magic number? Is there something that happened in 1974 that would have caused the release of all of these? I think it was probably a culmination of many, many events. It had been 10 years to the day since we had stopped using 90% silver in American coinage. If you're a silver stacker, you know 1964, the last year that we used 90%. So this had been exactly 10 years after we had stopped using 90% silver in our coinage. But we did continue to use silver in our coinage in the form of those 40% Kennedy half dollars. They were used all the way up and through 1970. But this is kind of that transition period that I've brushed against a few times before, is that we didn't really know what was next. Clearly there was still a desire. Clearly there was still a need for silver, and people had hoarded those 1964 and before pieces. And I think that probably the 40% silver pieces were being pulled out of circulation maybe almost as quickly as they hit circulation. So people that had grown up with silver, and everybody up to this point who was old enough to be spending coinage, had grown up with silver in their coinage. They were kind of grasping for that silver. They wanted to find it. It was no longer part of their circulating coinage. Where were you going to get it? And I think that's what a lot of these rounds answered, that question of where were you going to get it? You were going to get it in the form of these silver rounds. Other things were popular at the time. I've talked about silver art bars before. I think they are an overlooked part of the evolution of bullion. But this is kind of a more pure, in the kind of, not the literal sense, but almost in the descriptive sense. This is really our effort to find something that was going to replace those silver coins, and the silver round kind of took that shape. So 10 years from the day that we stopped using 90%, about 4 or 5 years after 40% stopped being used, this is right on the heels of the bicentennial. And if you were old enough to remember the bicentennial like I was, then you also remember that everybody and their brother was putting out memorial pieces, celebratory pieces. There were all sorts of commemorative pieces, and so many of them were made out of sterling silver or 999 silver. So I think these were probably kind of part of that entire movement. They weren't quite art rounds, though they could be quite attractive. They weren't quite silver bars. They weren't really a memorial or commemorative piece. They were really a way to own small increments of 999 pure silver. And it bears noting that the reason that some of these are 999 pure silver, and we've talked a little bit about this in some of the other videos that we've done, is this was the first opportunity for a lot of Americans, a lot of people around the world, to own 99.9% or 0.999 in that millesimal mark, pure silver. Because up until then, we have spent the silver. The silver was circulating silver, or it was in the form of silverware that we actually used on a regular basis. Having that alloy of copper along with the silver made that silver more durable. But this was really the first time that people started to finally get it through their heads that they weren't going to be spending silver anymore. So it didn't need to be sterling silver. It didn't need to be 90% pure silver. It could be 99.9% pure or 0.999 pure, because it was just going to sit in a safe deposit box or a vault somewhere. It didn't need to have that extra alloy for that durability, for strength. So an interesting period of time. If you're old enough to remember this, you've got me by a couple of years, but I do remember some of these early pieces way back when I first started stacking, and that's why we're going to focus on them. An interesting thing to note also, and this will be the last thing that I kind of comment on before we dive into that, is that as I'm picking these up, you'll notice that a lot of them have globes on them. A lot of them have an image depiction of the planet Earth, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing. There was a feeling that this was really kind of a global appeal. This was something that everybody around the world was after or would be after at some point. So these are outside of the boundaries of a country or even a continent. These were being minted as something that would kind of encompass the global need and desire for pure silver. It's interesting that the imagery was popular across many of these rounds, and I think if you are a student of these early rounds, you'll probably see it too. But enough about that. Let's get into the good stuff. Let's take a look at the silver. So I want to start over here on the upper left-hand side, and you'll probably remember a couple of these pieces from some of my other videos, and I'll tick them off while I'm explaining them. This is one of my all-time favorite rounds. This is called a Mondanero, and you've heard me talk about this in a video that I made about the discovery of a new silver bar. Let's take a look at the one Mondanero. And you can see it says one silver Mondanero there, and there's that globe that I was just talking about. We think that these were struck by a company called Intermint in Nevada. They were made for another company called Wade Ventures, so it's very probable that Wade Ventures were the ones that kind of commissioned these, and they were struck by Intermint in Nevada. Krauss Publications, who is kind of a known publisher of coin-related catalogs that lists pieces, actually has these pieces listed in them. And I think that's significant, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later in this video. They are listed in the Unusual Coins of the World catalog, and this is listed as X4, X5, and X6. That's the 4th edition of these. The reason that there are 3 different listings for these is because there is a 1, a 2, and a 3 Mondanero, and that's what I'm getting ready to talk about here. Some resources say that there was a possible relationship between these and another one that we're going to be talking about a little bit later called the Universo. I'm not so sure that that's there, but we'll take a look at it, see what you think about it a little bit later. The video that I talk about where these make an appearance is called the Previously Unknown Vintage Bar, and I'll show a picture of what I'm talking about here. I was able to get this image listed in the popular coin reference website called Numista. They were missing the image of the 3 Mondaneros, and I was able to supply it with them, and for that they gave me credit, so that's what you're looking at here. This is the 2 Mondanero, and you see how thick that is? Compare that to the 1 Mondanero. It's interesting now when we think about things being larger in size, we typically think of them as being larger in diameter. They get larger the heavier they are. But again, this was kind of an early period of time where there wasn't really a lot of experience with these. We didn't really know. The precious metals buying community wasn't really sure what they were after. So if you wanted something that was a 2-ounce version of the 1-ounce version, you just made it twice as thick. And you can see that that's got some serious thickness to it. And that's what's so fun about the 3 Mondaneros. These things are just a beast. These chunky 3 Mondanero pieces. Again, same design exactly, except for the word changing down at the top here that says 3 silver Mondaneros. So a fun, interesting, and exciting round. Numista does offer a bit of information about how scarce these are. Numista has something called their Numista Rarity Index. And the 1 Mondanero is listed as a 91, with a scale being 0 to 100, 0 being really, really common, 100 being incredibly rare. So the 1 Mondanero listed as a 91, that's pretty scarce. I would say that that's probably a pretty scarce issue. But the 2 and the 3 Mondaneros, they show them as being 100 out of 100, meaning they are very scarce and very rare, probably. I've estimated before that there are probably fewer than 50 of the 3 Mondaneros out there. There's really no way to know. Would we be safe in saying there's probably fewer than 100? I'd be comfortable with that. Let's just say that there's probably fewer than 100 of these big boy 3-ounce Mondaneros that are still in existence. The 2s, maybe a few more than that. The 1s I've actually seen many times before, so I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with Numista's 91 rating on that. I would say probably something closer to an 80 on those. They're certainly not abundant, but you can find them if you look for them. In fact, you can look on eBay and probably find examples of that one right now. Which reminds me, if you look these pieces up on eBay, the 1 Mondaneros don't seem to command a huge premium. If silver is somewhere around $22, $23 an ounce as I'm filming this video, you typically find them for maybe $30, $35 an ounce. And we'll talk about trying to buy these a little bit later as well. So those are the Mondaneros, the 1, the 2, and the 3 Mondaneros. The next one is the International Silver Trade Unit, and I believe that's this one here. Look at that. There's another globe. There's another world that we're looking at. This one is an interesting piece. It's a little bit difficult to find information about this. I don't seem to find very much, and the reason why probably is there are lots of pieces that look very similar to this. You've probably noticed rounds before that have a scale on them. That's a very common item to have depicted on a round. In fact, we've talked before many times about the silver ounces, 1978, 79, and 80, and even the version that went back in the 1940s. It too has a scale on it. This is a very common device to see on silver units because it depicts not just the accuracy of the item, but also the weight of the item. But this reverse or obverse, however you want to take it, I think is a pretty interesting one. It is 1 silver, and you'll see it listed here. It says ein Silber, and then there's Chinese characters there, and it says 1 silver, un argent, and then una plata. So in several different languages, German, Chinese, English, French, and Spanish, it says 1 silver. I think that's an interesting thing to call it. They're actually using the word silver as if it's a unit. They're not saying 1 silver trade unit, although it does say that on the piece. International silver unit, they're calling it 1 silver, as if the silver is just a unit, and I think that's kind of an interesting take on it. The interesting thing about these pieces, and I've talked about that kind of technology before, or that terminology before on the Mexican pieces, especially when you're talking about the early onzas, 1974, and it lists the weight in troy ounces, and you'll see it there, and then they have the weight in grains and grams below the scale. So 3 different ways that they have shown the weight of this. 1 troy ounce, and they list it in grains, and they list it in grams also. And they also show the purity in both percentage and millesimal, right? 0.999. So they show it in 99.9% pure, but also 0.999 purity. 3 different weights, 2 different ways of expressing the purity of the silver, and then silver mentioned in at least 3 or 4 languages across the surface of the coin. These on eBay right now about $40, so they're not super expensive. You know, that's a doable amount. I think if you can find these for a little bit less than that, you'd probably be doing just fine. The next one is the Commonwealth of the Nations Silver Exchange Unit. The Commonwealth of the Nations. That sounds very formal and very official. And I think this is really a beautiful design. Hey, what's that on the back? Well, it's a picture of the globe, of course. Like I said, so many of these items had the globe to represent international demand, international need for these items. This one I think is really kind of interesting because it has a lot of iconography on it that is of the era. So this is 1974. It's decidedly worker related. This is kind of workers of the world unite. 1974, maybe the height of the communist / socialist era of the world, when a lot of countries around the world were trying to kind of unite under these banners. I'm not offering a suggestion as to whether or not I think that's a good thing. I'm just saying that it was definitely something that was more prevalent at the time. It's got what I think are probably ears of corn or spikes of wheat. Spike is that the top part of the wheat branch that you would harvest, and you can see it there. I think that's one and that's the other. I think they are actually supposed to represent 2 different things there. You know, farming, a very workers unite kind of iconography. It's got both a male and a female figure on it, and they're harvesting wheat. You can see the woman back there in the background. She's cradling a crop. The male figure here is harvesting the wheat. Way back in the back behind the woman, you can just barely make out. See if I can bring it in. That looks like a silo on a farm, so I think that's probably a little bit more of that iconography. The male worker with a scythe, that's that huge blade that you use for chopping down the grains. A very similar feature between a distinction between the scythe and the sickle, of the hammer and sickle. So you know, I may be reading something into this that's not there, but it certainly looks to be of that early 1970s era. I think that's interesting to look at, whatever your political beliefs are. I think it's an interesting thing to see. This one actually says pure silver, not 1 silver, but pure silver, and it says it in German, English, and Spanish, so very similar to that one that we were just looking at, where it says 1 silver in those different languages. These ones, not very expensive. I looked at eBay again before I started filming this, and they're $30 to $35. That doesn't seem so bad. I think that's a lot of history, a lot of Very interesting looking coinage for not a lot of money. And then the last one, actually second to last one we want to take a look at is called the Silver Universo. And I mentioned those before because there is some suspicion or speculation that these were made by the same folks who made the Montoneros. I think the font you'll see there is very similar. Let's take a look at this where it says 1 silver up above. What do you think? Look at the grained stalks going around the outside. Man, that's a really similar font, a really similar stylization there. I think that there may be something to that. I'm not sure. 1 silver Universo. And look at that. There's globes on it too. So we've got indications of another iconography of the globe right there. These were made by M&B Minting. And if that device up here, this picture that we're looking at here, this thing, this logo, if you will, if that looks familiar, a lot of people call that an omega. It does look somewhat like the Greek symbol for omega, but it's not. That's actually a stylized M and B. I'll bring it up here again a little bit. So if you've got a silver bar, and these folks did make silver bars, people call those omega silver bars. That's actually supposed to be an M and a B together. And that's what the M&B stands for. It's not really Omega, it's M&B Minting. These are 1972. They have a basic listing on allenglehard.com, but they haven't really filled in the blanks yet. They kind of marked the space where this is going to be with a little bit of information about them, but the last time I checked, there were no images up yet of their silver bars. I bet there will be at some point pretty soon. M&B filed for a patent in September of 1969, and they produced these up until 1974. Here's a picture of one of their bars so you can see what it is that I'm talking about. And also, this is really interesting. This is a picture of some regional advertising. This is the December 1973 LA Times. So this would have appeared in the LA Times newspaper in 1973. And look at the price that they've shown there. That's $4.95 postage and packaging paid. So they were offering these and making a very good profit on them, selling them less than $5 a piece postage paid. How crazy is that? You know, some of the silver bars that we've talked about in the past in this kind of 1960s, 1970s, up until 1980 period of time, a lot of these smaller refineries ran into trouble, and M&B was no different. They ran into trouble too, and I think it's really important to remember what was happening. We were on the verge of silver exploding in value, and people were kind of clamoring to buy these pieces. And I think that may have had something to do with their ultimate demise. The company was started by Robert and Layla Graber, who actually started getting into SEC trouble, Securities and Exchange Commission trouble, in 1972, 1973. They divorced in 1973, and Robert died in 1974. So this really was a very short period of time. It's possible that some of these were minted after he finally died, but it seems somewhat unlikely. And I have seen a lot of these lately, and a lot of them in really, really stellar condition too. In fact, I think some of the major bullion retailers were selling these by the roll just recently. So maybe there are hordes of these out there that have yet to be melted. It's surprising to me that any of these survived the great meltings of the 1980s with the Hunt Brothers run-up, but apparently they did. eBay, these are quite common. So obviously, if you've seen these from the larger retailers, they are being bought and sold on places like eBay. I've seen these for as little as $25 recently. So very little over the spot price for these pieces in particular. But I think that's a really, hey, look, they've got a scale on them too. A really, really interesting, beautiful round for not a lot of money. And this is a piece that is over 50 years old now. I think that's pretty exceptional. What do you think? Some interesting rounds so far, right? And this is one that kind of started this all. If you saw the picture that I put up online of these pieces, it had a lot to do with this piece. I just happened to be in a local shop, and I saw this one out of the corner of my eye, and this just to me looked like a really crude round that I just wasn't that interested in. But it just piqued my interest enough that I asked if I could take a look at it, and I'm glad that I did, because look at the date on this, 1974. All of these pieces, 1974, 1972, Silver Security, Life, Liberty, and Prosperity, 1974. it's just a much cruder made round. That looks like something that somebody could have done in their garage almost, compared to some of these other pieces that just have brilliant designs and super detailed designs on them. This one just looks really basic. And it's odd almost that this one came out in 74, because clearly by this time these manufacturers were making pretty polished, and by that I mean design, not necessarily the condition of the silver, pretty polished pieces. These look really official. They look really good. But I thought this piece was interesting. I haven't been able to find out much information about that. That's really not that surprising, because the designs and the detail on it are so basic. But you can find these too. I saw these listed on eBay recently. They seem to run a little bit hotter. So these $35 to $40 a piece. You know, you never know. It's kind of strange that a piece that is this basic would be selling for a premium, while some of these other pieces that are a lot more interesting looking and fully fleshed out sell for not a discount, but certainly not much over the melt value of the silver contained within. It's a concept that I probably don't talk about often enough, and it's one of those really weird things that sometimes, even though there are tons of pieces out there, those pieces sell for a premium. And sometimes when there are very, very few pieces out there, those pieces sell for not very much at all. A great example of that is these Englehard prospectors. I talked about those at the beginning of this video. Englehard made 650,000 of these prospectors from 1982 to 1988. That's actually a pretty conservative figure. I think they were probably a few 10,000 more than that, but let's just go with 650,000. Yet these are a favorite in the stacking community, and you will rarely see these offered anywhere near melt. They seem to command a premium, the Englehard prospectors, $10 a piece sometimes. Sometimes, especially with those 1982s, they could be $20, $30 extra over and above the value of the silver, even though this is probably one of the biggest mass-produced rounds of this kind of mid to early era of silver rounds. A lot of these pieces, there is no way they were produced in those kinds of numbers, and you can probably pick them up a lot cheaper than you can those Englehard prospectors. Supply and demand, right? People know that Englehard name. We have kind of a fantasy about the early days of stacking, and this was something that was out there, so we think about these. But honestly, a lot of these other pieces, much, much smaller vintages, there just isn't as big a collector base for them. So even though there are far fewer of them, you often don't see them as expensive as you will these Englehard prospectors that they made 650,000+ of. Isn't that weird? Isn't that an interesting idea? Suggestions. I'm going to go over some of these with the scale and with the sigma so we can see just how close they are. And I have not done this yet, so this will be interesting for me as well. Let's take a quick look. I'm just going to go through weights, and we're going to start here checking the weights of these, and we're going to go with troy ounces. Set for 1 troy ounce, and we're going to go in reverse. So this is that silver security. 31.1 would be close enough for this purpose. Or rather 1, and this is saying 1.03 troy ounces. Now, as I've said before, your scale really needs to be on a firm surface, and we're, as always, on my Navajo prayer blanket. So once again, we are just over 1 troy ounce. That's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that at all. We're going to look at these silver Universo rounds. That's that one that's by M&B, and see how that one does. Hopefully you can see that, 1.04. Perfectly fine. I'm fine with that. I'm good with that. We're going to go backwards to the Commonwealth of the Nations silver round. See how we do there. 1.01. Interesting to note that these ones that have kind of almost the socialist symbology on them are a little bit lighter than the ones that aren't. I think that's kind of humorous. The International Silver Trade Unit. This one feels a little bit light. 1.0 exactly. No, I really haven't weighed these yet. I just felt that there was a slight difference between the two. And the Wade Ventures, the Mondanero, let's try the 1. 1.01. So all of these seem to be within tolerances of what I would be comfortable with when we're looking at a 1. Let's just see what the Englehard is. 1.01. Certainly within the same realm, within that same range. I'd be satisfied with all of these. Let's take a look, if you want to, here at the sigma, and we'll see just how close we are to how pure they are. And we're going to run backwards in the same direction. I'm going to set this at 99.9. We're not going to push it at 99.99. We're going to try 99.9, and we're going to start again with the silver security. Oh, we got to run calc. Yeah, that's fine. It's within the brackets. You can see that. It's got to be within those brackets. The closer it is to the center within the brackets, the higher confidence we have that this really is a 999 pure silver piece. We're going to go with the Universo. Just about the same position. Easily within those brackets, I would be perfectly fine calling that 99.9% pure. Let's see how our socialist friends went with the Commonwealth. Oh, dead center. How about that? So while the socialist piece, you know, I'm just kidding. While that piece was maybe a little bit light compared to the others, it's certainly dead center when it comes to its purity. And then we're going to look at the International Silver Trade Unit again. I just think this piece is kind of pretty. Ooh, that's still within the brackets, so that's still fine, but it's certainly off to the right. When I was judging the silver bars that you saw me with the Lydian Hoard, I would have called that a +2. That was 2 spaces off dead center, 2 spaces to the right of dead center. It's still within the brackets. It's still 99.9% pure, but I would be more comfortable, I think, buying these pieces that were a little bit closer to the center. You get to be a little bit snobby when you've been doing this for a while and you just realize, I don't want something that's kind of within the brackets. I want something that's definitely within the brackets. And the one Mondanero, dead center. That's fine too. So we're right there smack dab in the dead center. Let's take a look at the prospector just to see where we are. Close enough to dead center. I'd call that a +1, but that's fine. So all of these within the range that they need to be in terms of weight, all of them in terms of where they need to be in terms of purity, at least according to the Sigma. I'm comfortable with all of those. So there's no question that these pieces are legitimate, good pieces of silver. They are the right purity. They are the right weight. So if you decide that you want to pursue these, what are you looking for? I'll tell you what I do. And these fall into that category of pieces that I like trying to seek because I do look for pieces that are a little bit more interesting. I don't really want a huge handful of silver rounds that were made last week. I want something that has the extra that I talk about often. In this case, the extra is a really, really cool design, something that is of the era that they were made, the early 1970s. I like something that really shows its character and its age, but more importantly, I look for pieces that are in pristine condition. So I'm not looking for something that is well worn. You know, if it comes to tone, I'm okay with a little bit of tone, especially if it's attractively toned. You'll see that most of these pieces are bright white, with the exception of these Mondaneros, the 3 Mondaneros, just starting to develop a little bit of a coppery tone to them. That's a bad word to use when you're looking at silver. Let's call it orange or burnt umber. You don't want to ever say copper around silver stackers because their ears immediately perk up and think that you've got something that's silver plated. Trust me, these are not. I'll tell you what, dead center, right? Just to be sure. So I look for pieces that are in pristine condition. I look for pieces that are early. The earlier, the better. You can find silver rounds that were made in the 60s, 1971, 1972, 73, 74. That's an era that I kind of like. So those are the pieces that I would look for. Not really so interested in pieces that were made in the 1980s, although I do have many rounds or many tubes of the prospectors, and those are 82 to 89. Is that what we said? 88, 89, 1988. So early 70s, an interesting design, and they need to be absolutely pristine. Don't settle for something that is worn. Don't settle for something that is bagged mark. And as you've seen these pieces that I've been picking them up, these pieces are in brilliant uncirculated condition. We talked before about that cartwheel luster when we had the short video recently about luster, determining luster in silver coins. You can definitely see those spokes, those cartwheels moving across like hands on a watch all the way around the outside of this design. This is a fully struck, fully lustrous silver piece. Never been cleaned, never been circulated, and now it's over 50 years old. You can definitely see the luster there. So that's what I'm after. These pieces were never meant for circulation. These were never designed to be circulated, and because of that, they shouldn't show any kind of wear on them at all. If you see pieces that are of this era that are interesting looking, but they are heavily worn, or if they're really baggy, that just is an indication that they've been mistreated over the years. These shouldn't have a lot of contact marks on them. They should have zero wear on them. So I wouldn't bother to pick them up unless they were stunningly interesting and really, really fascinating. If not, I want to see these pieces in brilliant uncirculated condition. On that Sheldon scale, I wouldn't touch these less than a 64, probably looking for more like a 66 or a 67 on these even. And those are kind of the indications that I look for. If you can, if you've got the opportunity, test them out with a scale and test them out with a sigma. There are sometimes pieces that are underweight. I've never seen pieces that are under purity, but I have seen pieces that are underweight, typically not a whole lot underweight, but who wants something that is underweight? Especially when you go to sell, you have that ethical dilemma again that are you going to tell the person that's buying that it's underweight? And if so, are you ever going to be able to get out of this piece? So if you can, sigma and scale these pieces to make sure that they are the appropriate purity and the appropriate weight. And the last thing I would do, if you've got the time, if you've got the ability to do this, do the research online. See if these pieces are listed in any of the world catalogs that are out there. I mentioned before that the Mundaneros are listed in the Krauss Publications Unusual Coins of the World. These are X4, X5, and X6. Those are their catalog numbers. Anytime you can get pieces that are listed in catalogs, listed on websites, listed in other resources where they reference them, you are building up the desirability of these pieces. So really strange, unusual pieces that have no maker's mark on them, that aren't listed in a catalog anywhere, I would be less interested in those. But if you can find pieces that actually have catalog numbers and we know, or we can at least estimate the mintages of, those will probably benefit you in the long run over and above those pieces that we just don't know very much about. Always use your own input. Always think to yourself, if this is something interesting, if this is something that you like, there's nothing wrong with that. But always chase after those pieces that have the most interesting mintages, that we know something about, that we can tell are in brilliant uncirculated condition. And the final key to all of this is don't pay a premium over and above what they should be selling for their silver value. So if you can get a modern piece for $2 or $3 or $4 over the value of the silver, don't pay $10 or $15 or $20 over the value of the silver for these pieces. I guarantee you, if you do due diligence, if you do really proper searching on these, you can find these with very little premium, and you can sometimes even get them for no premium because they're just generic silver rounds to a lot of sellers. You're the one that's adding that value by understanding exactly what it is that they are. The 50-year club for silver rounds. How interesting is that? I think this is a really fun part of the hobby. I don't have a ton of silver rounds for this very reason. I'm a little bit more careful when it comes to buying silver rounds. I want something that checks off all of those boxes, that's got the historic interest, a beautiful design, brilliant uncirculated condition, and that I didn't have to pay an arm and a leg for. So these are just some of my more interesting 50-year club rounds. Do you have any of these? Do you have any that I didn't talk about today? If so, let me know what they are down below. I'd love to see what you've got, or at least hear what you have. Do these interest you? Would you rather have modern pieces, or do these pieces kind of strike that check those boxes for you as well? Let me know your thoughts down below. If you have questions about any of these pieces, I will try to address them if I can. Some of these are a little bit difficult to research, but I'll give it a shot. If you have suggestions for other videos that you'd like to see me make, as always, go ahead and leave that suggestion down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you have not subscribed to the channel, here's your opportunity. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Like the video. That pushes the video to other people who have the same interests that you do. And as always, thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as you go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.